Radio, and we are also simulcasting over live stream. This is going to be, we're going to be interviewing Courtney Brown, and hold on one second here because we just have had some electronic issues, and so I'm hoping this is gonna all work. We're just calling our guest back to get him back on the line.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, wonderful. So we're pulling you up, and you should be live at this moment. According to my screen, you are. So that's really excellent.
Okay.
And we've got Revolution Radio on the line, and we've also got American Freedom Radio for the people that are listening on audio. So if people that are on radio and want to listen to this and see the video, which will be Courtney Brown and myself, whenever that is working, then you should try to pay for the event, which is $7. We're basically trying to make a little money for Courtney's organization, the Farsight Institute, as well as our own. So that's what's happening with all of that. Now I have various things going on, so I'm having to sort of multitask as we go. But hopefully you can see us at this moment, and I'm not sure if I'm actually on the screen or not. At this moment, Courtney, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, because they will be watching, and we've got a chat room here as well.
Sure. That's great. You can see my video fine, is that right?
Yeah, you look great. Really.
Perfect. Okay, well, as you nicely introduced, I'm Courtney Brown, and I am a couple things, but I'm the director of the Farsight Institute. That's F-A-R-S-I-G-H-T, and we're an institute that studies the subject of remote viewing. Remote viewing is a mental procedure that uses procedures that were developed by the United States military and used for espionage purposes. And I am the leading scholar, the leading academic, I can say that clearly and I'll explain why, that studies remote viewing as it is done using the procedures that were developed by the U.S. military and used for espionage purposes, but now we use them for scientific experiments, or procedures that are derivative of those methodologies. The reason I can say that I'm the leading scholar is because I am the only academic that studies remote viewing from the perspective of those procedures. And I have published numerous books on the subject, including a science book called Remote Viewing, the Science and Theory of Non-Physical Perception, and a number of DVDs. In particular, the science projects that we do at the Farsight Institute are so widespread, so encompassing, that some people, when they go to our website, they're a bit overwhelmed with the amount of material that's there. So we have a DVD called The Farsight Experiments that helps to summarize, gets people on the ground really quickly, on the ground running, so that you can get an idea of the types of things we do. Again, we do scientific experiments. Of the projects that we've done recently, over the last few years, we've done a project on multiple universes. Believe it or not, that's the reality that we live in, and we're not going to be talking about that tonight, but we have a large project that clearly shows that we do in fact live in a multiple universe environment, very similar to what you see when you saw the old Star Trek films with multiple parallel universes, or even the new Men in Black 3 movie that just came out. And so we also have done a study on an actual operational base on Mars with a clear NASA Malin JPL picture to go on with a clear anomaly of a spray nozzle pipeline leading to a dome. And we've done a huge remote viewing study on that. We've also done a project on an exploding planet that was originally proposed. Actually, it was proposed a long time ago, but it was really solidly defended with a huge amount of planetary data by the late astronomer Thomas Van Flandern, who was head of his Department of Celestial Mechanics at the Naval Observatory in the United States. And we did a remote viewing study on that, and the planet we call Maldek, and it's between the orbit, or it was between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, and it did explode. And so our data exactly corroborate the huge amount of planetary data that support the hypothesis that was developed, that was accumulated by Thomas van Flandern. And then we did something that was what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is the so-called post-2012 Earth changes, which we were looking for. What we originally were looking for is small climatic differences between the years 2008 and 2013, and instead we found huge things that were totally unexpected. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. And all of those projects, plus the sciences associated with that, are on the DVD, the Farsight Experiment. So as we go through the project tonight, and you want to get a little bit more, that DVD is really designed to get you on the ground and running. The experiments that we do are very unlike anything you've ever seen before. The Farsight Institute is a nonprofit, and it's very unlike people who just come onto the late night radio and say, "Oh, I had a bunch of remote viewers, and they're the best in the world, and and this is what we found." So we don't do that. What we do is the Farsight Institute is the only science shop anywhere available. There is no other place where you can go and you can see all of the sessions yourself, all of the explanatory information, full descriptions of what happened, the track records going back many years of the remote viewers. The remote viewers that we work with have generally been trained in the use of these military or military-derived procedures for a typical average of 10 years or more. They're really good at it. There's fewer than 20 of such people on the whole planet. And we do experiments with these people. And these people were primarily trained by Glenn Wheaton and Lynn Buchanan. Glenn Wheaton is out of Special Forces Intelligence, and he came out of what is essentially a movement within the Special Forces Intelligence that was later called the 1st Earth Battalion. And the other person we work with is Lynn Buchanan, and Lynn Buchanan came out of Defense Intelligence Agency, both out of the Army, but a different branch of the Army. And Lynn Buchanan is the leading trainer in CRV, or Controlled Remote Viewing, and Glenn Wheaton is the leading trainer in HRVG, or Hawaii Remote Viewing Guild procedures. And those two groups are literally the best anywhere for doing these types of things. Again, I got my PhD with a focus on mathematical modeling in Missouri at Washington University, and Missouri is very useful in this context because Missouri is the so-called show me state. So I'm never asking anyone to believe me saying something's going to happen. I don't make any predictions. I simply show you what the data are and explain how we got the data and describe what the data say. And then I let you draw your own conclusions. And then I say, these are the viewers. These are the track records of these viewers. All of that information is available for free on our website at www.farsight.org. That's F-A-R-S-I-G-H-T. I have heard from a number of people that they are overwhelmed a bit when they come to the website because there's so much there. That's why we designed the DVDs like the Farsight Experiments to make it sort of okay. But anyway, that's a basic background of me. I'm the leading scholar that studies remote viewing from the perspective of that. And it's a mental procedure that allows viewers to transfer information across time and space, past, present, and future. Now, the physics of this is very, very different from what you're taught in school, in high school and college. You will have to wait about 20 years before they teach this stuff casually in colleges, but that's the normal process. Everything that you're taught in college is the dominant stuff that the people who are 45, 50, for example, years old developed when they were in graduate school. So, you know, it's the young people that are in graduate school now that are going to replace the older people, and there's a time lag for that type of stuff. But the physics we do now understand, and I went into a little bit of the physics in an interview I had with Kerry Cassidy on Revolution Radio, and so that recording is still available. So if you are interested in some of the physics that we talked about then, that's a good place to go. Also, if you're the type that reads, a lot of people don't read these days. I mean, I'm a college professor. I don't do remote viewing research at my university. I teach math courses and a social science application, but nonetheless, a lot of college kids across the country, they don't read these days. So, but if you are a reader, my book, Remote Viewing: The Science and Theory of Non-Physical Perception, is a good place to get a lot of the physics that's associated with this. So anyway, that's a basic introduction, Kerry, unless you'd want me to add something more.
No, that's great. Thank you very much for that. I think that people might, before we go into all of the sort of data that you're going to cover,
sure,
people might like to know the distinction between what you do and what the military does. In other words, how the methods might be different.
Well, for controlled remote viewing, which is done by Lynn Buchanan, who came out of DIA, that's pretty much the way the military did it, exactly. And very similarly with the procedures that are Hawaii Remote Viewer Guild procedures coming out of Special Forces. They had different people that were the sort of the creative genius behind them. For the Special Forces stuff that Glenn Wheaton teaches, that was the genius behind that was Dr. Richard Ireland. He was a natural psychic, but he was also brilliant. And he came up with, that's the genius behind those procedures. The procedures for controlled remote viewing, they were essentially developed by Ingo Swann, and he worked with the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency in coming up with those procedures. So Glenn Wheaton and Lynn Buchanan pretty much follow the same guidelines they had earlier on, but it's in the application of these procedures that everything differs between what we do and what the military did. In the application, the military used those things operationally. Now, officially, the governmental programs, when they became public, they were closed down. Now, they were closed down in the mid-90s. The military knew. I was not in the military, so I don't try to give a lot of history about the military projects, but nonetheless, the basics is that when they knew that the program was going to become known to the public, they basically declassified it and let it be openly known. And then they said that they closed it down and won't ever do it again because it was a bit of a scandal doing psychic stuff in the military. But many people, including myself, are beyond 100% convinced that they opened up a new project, and they have a very active remote viewing project going on now. Some of the information I heard is astounding with regard to the types of things they're trying, but that's not available to the public, and if and when it ever does become available to the public, I am certain they will close it down immediately and say, oh, that was some rogue unit, we don't know how it ever started, we missed that one, don't worry, we won't do it again, and then they will immediately open up yet another one. The remote viewing itself, the military has never, the U.S. government has never walked away from the value of the process. What they have walked away from is trying to deal with the public with things like that. They actually don't want the public to be really conversant, especially mainstream, about the remote viewing phenomenon, because they think of it in terms of espionage purposes. I think of it in terms of science purposes, but from espionage purposes, there are no longer any secrets. But from science purposes, it's really fascinating. So we use these things not for spying. We use these things for investigations on the nature of physical reality, the nature of parallel universes, the nature of time. And next week, for example, I'm going to the University of Colorado at Boulder for the Society of Scientific Exploration and giving a presentation on the physics. Now, I'm a mathematician, and I've spoken in university settings and prestigious settings among groups of physicists, including Nobels, across the world, across the country. And I often present information with respect to the mathematics. Well, I'm giving a very intense presentation in Boulder on the mathematics of remote viewing on the level of quantum mechanics. Don't worry, we're not going to be doing that today. But again, it's because I'm a mathematician that I can get into the understanding of how it could work in the first place. And it's also really fun. If you know anything about math, you can really get into the quantum mechanics itself and realize where the quantum mechanics people, the greats, I mean people like Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg, where they made mistakes. You can actually say, oh gosh, that's where they messed up. And when you have an experience like that, it's so great, it's so fun. I mean, you look at people like Einstein, for example, and Einstein, of course, came up with two great relativity theories. One was a special relativity theory, which is dealing with time and space. But the other was general relativity, which was gravity. And he made a mistake in the gravity and the general relativity stuff. And it was a simple mistake. It was actually a derivative mistake. And it was a simple screw-up. He just messed it up. And then, but in this huge level of mathematics that was very complicated, other people then went through it. And eventually somebody found out, they saw the mistake and corrected it. And then they said, well, hey, well, if you follow things through after fixing that silly mistake, it must have been like a typo, you get black holes. Well, Einstein was so upset that, you know, he made a mistake, that for 10 years he denied it was a mistake and tried to defend it. His ego was involved. But it's so great when you make a discovery like that. By the way, 10 years later, he finally confessed he made the mistake and said, okay, so what? There's black holes. Let's go on. But anyway, when you look at like quantum mechanics and you look at it and you realize the mistakes that Werner Heisenberg made and Niels Bohr made, other people who support the so-called Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, and then you put two and two together and follow the dots and connect everything, and you come up with a perfectly reasonable explanation for why remote viewing works on the level of physics. I mean, it is so exciting to do stuff like that. But again, we're not going to be talking about that today, so you don't need to worry your your viewers and listeners. We will be talking about the post-2012 stuff, which is incredibly interesting.
Okay. Well, thank you, Courtney. That's great. I have to say that I would like to go down that road, discussing a little more of the background in terms of the physics of why remote viewing works. But what we'll do is, because we have a focus for this particular live stream, let's follow our agenda, and then if we have time at the end, maybe we can go into that.
Sure, and you can, you know, I've got a good relationship with you, Kerry. Anytime you want me back for another interview that goes into any particular aspect, be it on the radio, the internet, video, whatever, live stream, you can always just ask me.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That would be great.
Okay, so what would you like me to start with?
Okay, well, first of all, I guess we want to talk about the question at hand, and I'm for some reason my Skype sort of pictures have just done something very strange, so I apologize for that, everyone. I don't know what's going on here, but
can you still see me?
No, there you are. Okay, great. I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, but it is.
And I'm still moving, correctly?
I think what's happened is we might have lost one of the radio stations, or though it looks like they're there. It's hard to say. Okay, we'll just assume that everything's working. So at this moment, what I'd like to do is set up the problem, so to speak, that you guys, you know, how you began to set up the whole situation, how you use a blind kind of, I'm not sure how you do it exactly, but I assume you use kind of this numerical system.
Yeah, I'll explain how we set it up, and then you'll understand why it really takes a scientist to do this type of stuff. That's why we get trained as scientists to set these things up. But this was a novel experiment that we really had to do. Now, understand, back in 2008, we had a desire, I had a desire to see if remote viewing could be possibly used to discern subtle levels of climate change, maybe a little extra inch of, on the rise of the sea level, perhaps a little bit less or more snow on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, things like that. So we did an experiment between June 1st, 2008, and June 1st, 2013, 5 years. And I was hoping to be able to see anything. Well, if we saw any little difference at all, I'd say, well, that's something. We made an observation, and let's wait till June 1st, 2013 and see what happened. But we got huge, huge, huge stuff. And so this is how so in order to understand how huge all this stuff is, you have to understand how I set up the experiment. Okay, so this is it. We have a situation in which all remote viewers absolutely must, in order for the process to work, they must work blind. They cannot be told remote view the Eiffel Tower. Their memory and everything else would come back in, their imagination. So they must be totally blind. They must simply know that there's a target. That's it, nothing else. They go into a room with a stack of paper, a pen. An hour later, they come out with 20 pages of data exactly describing the target. The target is a thing that they're supposed to perceive. They don't know anything about it. If they know even the slightest amount, it can throw off everything. So it's very important that they work in what we call blind conditions, knowing nothing. If they don't know anything, then we can get really great data. So if they, and this is not a situation where someone can say, oh, but if they get really good, then they can work with, knowledge of the target. No, it doesn't work that way. If they're really good, they don't want to know anything about the target, because then they can trust the stuff that's coming through using the remote viewing procedures. Okay, so what I did was I set up an experiment in which we had a variety of targets across the large plot of the globe. Those targets were Vaitupu Tuvalu, an island in the South Pacific, right at sea level. If the sea level rose a little bit in 5 years, I thought maybe we might be able to notice a little bit of change in Vaitupu. Fort Jesus, that's a Portuguese fort on the coast of Kenya in Mombasa. It's a museum. It's an old fort, that's in ruins. Tourists go to see it. The Sydney Opera House in Sydney, Australia, with that distinctive architecture. Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. Well, we wanted to see if there was a little bit of a change in the snow levels on the tops of that mountain. The United States Congress Building in Washington, D.C. By the way, the United States Congress Building is essentially at sea level. Male International Airport in the Maldives. The KITV building in Honolulu, Hawaii. One of our great remote viewers, Dick Allgaier, works as a celebrity newscaster in KITV in Honolulu. The Vehicle Assembly Building at Launch Complex 13, Kennedy Space Center, Merritt Island, Florida, Cape Canaveral. And finally, Key West in Florida. So those are the targets, and those are the places that the viewers were supposed to look at. And they didn't know those targets, of course. And then there were 2 years, 2008 and 2013. Now, 2008 was June 1st. 2013 was also June 1st, so a clear 5-year gap. However, we have been concerned at that point with this idea that there might be multiple realities. We know there are multiple realities now, but back in those days in 2008, we were concerned with trying to be able to control future realities. Now, I'm going to say something that I'm not backing up with the discussion of physics, but if we were talking about the physics of remote viewing, trust me, I would go on for a number of hours talking about the physics, and I would explain it to you. You can get a lot of that explanation on the DVD, the Far Side Experiments, if you want it, but for right now, I'm just going to give you the results. And the results is that if you're going into the future, and please, everyone listen to this, there is no such thing as predicting the future. You cannot say that X is going to happen, because we do live in a multiple reality context. That means there are other realities in which, Kerry, I'm not seeing your video picture, so can you just tell me, what is the color of your blouse?
Well, I guess sort of deep pink.
Okay, well, there is another reality in which you're wearing, say, a purple blouse, or another one in which it's scarlet, or another one in which it's blue, and another one in which you get the idea. And so there are multiple realities in which every possible thing actually does happen. Now, we don't have trouble remote viewing the past or the present because in our minds we know where we are in the present. In the context of multiple realities, we don't need to worry about all of them because, and they are all as legitimate and as real as the one we're perceiving now. Now, this may seem hard to understand, but there is physics behind it that we're not going into, but it does all tie together. So you can sort of say, well, why is it that the present is so easily discernible as one? Well, it's discernible as one because we are locking on to one reality. Our brains are actually connecting to one particular reality, the here and now that we see. And we also have one perceived past. That means we have a timeline that goes from our present now that goes into the past. So when we remote view the past, we know where we want to be. We know that we want to be at some point in the past that existed in our timeline. So we don't worry about these alternate timelines. But in the future, we haven't gotten there yet, and the alternate timelines are all very real. So when we remote view the future, it is impossible to say this will happen exactly. Only thing that can be said is there are probabilities for such a thing happen. Some things are more probable than others. And one of the things that's really tripped up physicists with respect to understanding this mathematically, they said they're very aware of this problem of multiple realities. And it's very mainstream now. Even Brian Greene, the very mainstream physicist, just wrote a book on the hidden realities. So the idea of these multiple realities is very current. Young graduate students in physics are really excited about this ideas. And so the basic idea is if everything happens, how can there be probability? If everything happens, everything should just happen. There should be no probability. They don't quite understand the nature of timeline momentum, in which certain things are more likely to happen based on the momentum of the history that you have in your particular timeline. And so we have probabilities for the future, but we don't have a single deterministic thing for the future. And no one can solve that problem, not even the most advanced ETs, extraterrestrials. No one can solve that problem because it's in the nature of reality. However, some things are very, very subtle and very slight in the future, and really they don't affect what happens in other timelines. But some things, some events are so big, they can affect other timelines. And some things can be really so big that they affect almost all of the timelines. So if something really, really, really big is happening, then it becomes like a juggernaut, and all of the various timelines have to funnel through it because it's of such great magnitude. For example, this is not going to happen in our future, so I'm coming up with an imaginary thing, okay? Let us say that there is a civilization around a star, and the star goes supernova. The whole thing explodes. Well, there can be a zillion timelines for the civilization that's around that star system, but, you know, with people wearing different things in different timelines, doing different things in different timelines, but all the timelines have to go through the juggernaut of the star going supernova. It affects everything. It's too big a thing. Now let's go back to that same civilization and say they had a city in which there was an earthquake. Well, that's a big event, but it's lesser than the star going supernova. So that event would affect a whole bunch of timelines, but you'd have some timelines having a huge earthquake that would be devastating for that city, but other timelines they would feel rumbles and maybe a couple pipes broke, but nothing devastating. And other timelines, they'd feel maybe just a gentle shaking of the building. Do you get the idea? So the bigger the event, the more timelines it encompasses. So what I think has happened with the 2013 data that we have across these various places, we have an attempt to look at two different timelines. And the experiment is that if we specify characteristics of the two timelines in advance, can we then see what's ahead on those two timelines. Now, neither one of those timelines would be ours, but they might be close. And so we want to say, well, if our timeline is more like X, Y, and Z, well, what does that timeline look like? Well, what if it's more like A, B, and C? What does that timeline look like? And so if we sort of say, if we say this timeline with these characteristics looks like that, and the other timeline with those characteristics looks like that, we then offer ourselves the opportunity to change our behavior so that we can end up like timeline A or timeline B. So what we did was we specified two different timelines for 2013 for all of these targets. And then these two different timelines were, the first one was a timeline in which the leadership of the mainstream global scientific establishment continues to ignore or deny the reality of the remote viewing phenomenon and existence of life not originating from Earth. The idea is if they did acknowledge anything like that, like remote viewing and any aspect of extraterrestrial life, even microbial, it might make humans react to the planet differently, and we might do things differently, and we might improve our climate. And the other timeline was in which the leaders of the mainstream global scientific establishment do recognize the reality of remote viewing and the existence of life not originating on Earth.
Okay,
So
Courtney, let me ask you a question here just to
Sure.
fine-tune this slightly.
Yeah.
When you're saying the members of the mainstream reality acknowledging the reality of, first of all, remote viewing, and secondly, all visitors from other...
Well, no, any aspect of extraterrestrial life, even microbial.
Right.
And it was the mainstream scientific community that we were looking, if they did this recognition, would the climate be any different? That's what we were looking
So you're only looking at the mainstream scientific community. You were not looking at, for example, governments.
Right. In fact, I was basically assuming that the government responds to things that happens. It does not act proactively.
Interesting.
So,
okay, go
yeah,
ahead.
so I was saying, let's see what happens if someone brave in the scientific community steps up and says, hey guys, let's get over it. This remote viewing stuff, it really happens. Let's just acknowledge it and move on. And then, of course, it would cause a big stir, and we'd have to do some demonstrations of remote viewing. People would ask for demonstrations, which we can do now, and so on. But the idea is, if they did acknowledge the reality of remote viewing, then everything else that we've discovered with remote viewing would become known, and then people might say, oh, wow, we really have to then protect our planet. We have to do something. That was the original idea. Again, we were not expecting major Earth changes at all. We were expecting subtle things, but very fortunately, from the perspective of our experiment, the changes were huge, and that was really great because then it gave us a binary result. If we got subtle stuff, you know, people could always say, yeah, but it's just just by chance. But by getting major stuff, we set up the experiment really nicely, just by chance, to test the idea if there's major change, then it can affect a whole bunch of timelines, including our timelines. So now the other thing I want to do is just to be able to tell your viewers, and then we can get into the actual results. I want to tell your viewers and listeners how we actually controlled the assignment of targets to the sessions. Now this is going to twist everyone's head around a little bit, so just bear with me. Remote viewing really works independently of time. So you can really transfer information across time and space. Now scientists, physicists are terrified with this idea because it's been known since the advent of information theory in the 1970s that information is identical to mass, real things. In fact, there's been a thought experiment that's been around for a long while, and it was just recently confirmed experimentally that you can actually translate information into energy. You can actually, and now that may seem non-obvious to the non-scientist, but
well,
it's...
Actually, Arthur C. Clarke did that in one of his books.
Yeah, but now they've actually done it in laboratories. So actually information is a different form of energy, as oddly as that way. And so that when we're transferring information with remote viewing, it's the same as if we're transferring mass or energy. So the physicists are really disturbed by the remote viewing implications. But the basic thing is what we had all those targets, 9 targets, and we had 3 times June 1st, 2008, and June 1st, 2013, 2 separate timelines. So what we did was we said, okay, everybody do your sessions first. So everybody did sessions. They didn't know anything about the timelines. They didn't know anything about the locations, the targets themselves. They didn't know, for example, Malé International Airport or KITV building. They knew nothing about that. But they did these sessions, and they did a whole bunch of sessions, but they didn't know, there was no way they could have known whether they were doing a session for 2008 or 2013. You see, what happened was, we had a rule. I developed a rule saying, let's say there's 17 or 18 sessions and 18 targets. That means each target has to be associated with each session, meaning a target and a session have to match up, so you can look at the session data and compare it to the target. For example, you look at the session for remote viewing for KITV building, and you look at the target for KITV building and see if the session looks like the target. Well, what we did is I created a rule such as target 5 is associated with target 3, target 5 is associated with session 3, or target 7 is associated with session 1, so on. And that rule, associating all of our targets with the various sessions, I came up with 999 randomly jumbled versions of that rule. So there were all sorts of different ways you could match up a target with a session. I put all 999 plus another rule at the top of those 999 on an encrypted file in the internet on the website for the Farsight Institute, farsight.org, Farsight.org, O-R-G, and that 999 possible target associations was put up on the website, and literally tens of thousands of people downloaded it. Well, that rule that was at the top of that file said, which rule of these 999 will actually be used will be determined by the last 3 integer digits, of the Dow Jones number on Friday, June 4th, 2008. So, all of the sessions were done months before that. They started early in 2008, and by by around April, all of the sessions were encrypted in 256-bit military-grade encryption, put up on the website. Tens of thousands of people around the planet were downloading them, holding them so that we couldn't cheat. We had to wait until June 4th, and on June 4th, I posted the password for the file that had all of the target associations, and then people looked at the top line and they said, oh my goodness, the Dow Jones number tells us which one of these works. So they looked at the top line and they saw the Dow Jones number. I believe it was 243 or something like that. So they looked down at the rule 243, whichever number it was, and that was the rule that associated which target with each session. So while the viewers were doing their sessions, which was months earlier, there was no possible way in any manner, not even me, nobody could have known which session was going to be associated with which target. So it was totally squeaky clean, blind, squeaky clean scientific. It was perfect. And so it was basically an absolute perfect randomization of the targets and the sessions, so that we can say that, you know, what our analysis of the sessions is, it was not based on any type of predisposition for me, because the sessions were randomly associated with the targets. So then we now looked. We then clipped them together. Which target is associated with which session? And we looked at the results. Now, Kerry, if this is enough background, perhaps I should sort of summarize what we found, and then we can go into details. What would you like me to do?
Okay, well, I mean, I'm appreciating all of this explanation. I don't know if other people
Okay.
are. It's hard to say, but I do appreciate it. So if you were going to go to the next step logically, what would be the next step logically?
Well, the next step logically is simply to start presenting some of the differences that we found between the 2008 and 2013 targets, both timelines for 2013, because remember, we cannot predict the future, but we are experimenting to see if we can describe two timelines and then to see if our particular timeline matches either one of those timelines, or is sort of close to, not matches exactly, but is sort of close to. The results are so astounding that it may not matter which timeline we are on. But when you see the actual results, one of the things that you should say immediately is, wow, you know, if it was totally random, why did all of the huge change happen only in the 2013 targets on those sessions? Why didn't any of the big change happen in the 2008? Now, we all know what happened in 2008. The tourists were still going to Vaitupu Tuvalu and Fort Jesus and the Sydney Opera House. It was still a sunny day. Mount Kilimanjaro was still sparkling in the sun. U.S. Congress building was still there. The Malay International Airport was still there. The KITV building was still pumping out news stories. Key West was still filled with surfers and snorkelers and everything like that. So the 2008 sessions, which, by the way, are all up free on the Institute's website. Again, it's a little bit daunting to realize we have so much information. So if you go there and you get overwhelmed, start with the DVD, the Farsight Experiments, and that will get you on the ground running, and that will really explain everything and pull it all together. But the one question you should be adding is, why do the viewers find all things in 2008 so nice, and why did they find 2013 stuff so very different from nice?
Okay, so let me stop you there, just because I want to be clear here.
Yes.
You're referring to 2008. You've got two timelines there, as well as two timelines.
They both start with one timeline. They have a starting point of 2008. The two timelines branch off from 2008, so you don't actually get two timelines separately until 2013, but they both start at one point on 2008.
Okay, and then let me ask you this question, which might be leaping ahead, but I'm actually
no, it's great.
No, so we start with one timeline in 2008, the one we know, I assume.
Yes.
Then it diverges once you ask the question, which is the question you posed, which again pertains to what happens to those timelines if one of these things is true and one of these things is not true and the other, meaning the thing that we're talking about, which is scientists acknowledge the two realities.
Exactly.
Discussed. And then you're saying you got information about 2013, but you've got timelines in 2013. And
yes.
So those timelines have to give you, one timeline gives you the answer with the scientists having acknowledged the reality of remote viewing and life on other planets. Was that a worse scenario or a better scenario than...
Slightly better. Slightly better.
Slightly better.
Slightly better, which my interpretation is that it makes a bit of difference, but apparently the events that seem to be heading in our way are of sufficient magnitude that it wasn't enough to make a huge difference, but it did make some difference. My own speculation, and we haven't yet discussed what the results are, but my own speculation is that with the scientific community acknowledging the reality of remote viewing, it then puts the entire planet on a situation of being open to new ideas. And then people will start to realize that we have to change the way we think, and the serving of self won't work in a situation like this. We really have to talk about working together. And so I'm assuming that the differences that we do see are results of people interacting, coming together, working as groups in a common frame of mind to help getting through some of the troubled times.
Okay, so I mean,
And if you don't have that, if the scientific community doesn't do that, then the possibility is that the civilization simply hits the wall.
okay, but I guess now we need you to say exactly how it played out,
Okay.
information you received, and then we'll kind of delve into it from there.
All right, fine. And I don't mind going back into the technical aspects of the study. I personally like that a lot. I just don't want to bore people. So, but as long as you're thinking it's still good, you can have me dive back into that. And again, I do go into that a lot in the DVD.
All
so
right.
if people want to go there, that's one place. But getting into the results, let me start with a summary, if that's all right. And then we can get into specific sessions so that you can actually see examples of what I mean. The remote viewing data I have organized in terms of two basic things. One are physical changes in many of the geographical locations by mid-2013. And then we have the changes that they affect humans. So how humans are reacting. So let's look at what the physical changes are. The physical changes, we have viewers who are really good and have extensive track records that are well published on our website. You know who they are, you see what they've done. We did, for example, a full year multiple universe project, sessions done with projects every single month for a whole year. So you can look at how good they are as viewers for a whole year, target after target after target. And what they seem to find are impacts of all things from what appear to be large meteors leading to tsunamis and possible volcanism. If you didn't think I was surprised by that one, then you're really mistaken. I was really surprised by that. We also have the extensive and forceful flooding of coastal areas. I'll give you examples later, but I'm not talking about something small. Excessive solar radiation and storms and other severe weather. Okay, now in terms of the effects that these changes have on humans, we have massive self-organized relocation from coastal areas, essentially refugees. The breakdown of rescue or other notable governmental functioning, the breakdown of the food supply system, the breakdown of the vehicular transport system, and extensive loss of buildings near coasts. So it really looks from these data. Now, mind you, there might be a problem with our data in this sense. We were looking at a lot of coastal areas. So if we see a lot of problems in the coastal areas, that's where we were looking. We really didn't look in places like Iowa. So we were originally hoping to see if we could find some climate changes, and we thought that the coastal areas might be more susceptible to climate changes, so that's where we were looking. So I really don't know what's happening in the inner parts of places, like the inner parts of Europe or the inner parts of the United States or other places. We really know a lot about the coastal areas. Well, from these coastal areas, we saw people leaving these coastal areas, a lot of people having a very difficult time. The idea of looking for a safe haven, going some places, getting out.
And this is, I just want to reiterate, this is on both timelines for 2013.
Yes, but it was a little bit worse for the timeline in which the mainstream scientific community continued to ignore or deny the reality of the remote viewing phenomenon.
Very interesting. Yeah.
It was a little bit worse. I really would have loved to have seen it.
What does it mean a little bit worse? Could you use an example for what a little bit versus a bad bit would be?
Well, the best way to say that would be the actual percentages. And the percentages, what we mean by a little bit worse, is that the percentages of the number of sessions that were really bad went up. In in the timeline in which the scientific community continued to ignore or deny the reality of the remote viewing phenomenon. So essentially we're getting more than 50% of the sessions for 2013 showing complete wipeout disasters for those areas.
Okay, and then this is again the specific areas that you selected, correct?
Yes, yes, and again, we were not looking at places like Iowa and Kansas. We were looking at coastal areas, so our data are really quite focused on the coasts.
I understand, and just to run down that really quickly, we've got somewhere in Africa, we've got, do you want to just run down that Key West, the list?
Yeah, okay, just in places, we have an island in the South Pacific, on the coast of East Africa, the coast of Australia, Sydney, a mountain that's not far away from Mombasa, Kenya, but this is the Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. So we have two locations in Africa that are not far away. One's a mountain, one's coast.
Well, that's
the U.S. Congress building, Honolulu, Key West, Mali, the Maldives, things like that.
Okay, but the distinction, I guess I'm still waiting for the distinction between how bad. So in other words, if you come up with, you said better than 50% sort of negative reports of massive earth changes in at least the coastal areas for 2013, and you're going to also be wondering when in 2013, and as a result of what in 2013, if any of this came through. But if you had 10 remote viewing reports,
yes,
and you've got, are you talking about 90% of them? Are you talking about 60% of them?
Yeah, actually, there's no way I can do this except tell you the actual numbers. And those numbers, I wasn't expecting this question, so I will have the numbers for you. Maybe if we can talk about something else while I'm clicking on a couple things to get you those numbers, and I will have those numbers in about 30 seconds.
I'm sorry, sure.
No, yeah, you're asking very good questions. I just was not prepared for that.
All right.
And so I will have those for you in a matter of moments. But I can talk while I'm getting that information.
Okay. Well, then if you want to describe the changes, because when somebody says Earth changes, there's a whole list that you can go through. And I guess what we would like to know also, if the people listening, I would assume would like to know, what's on the list? Like, what are the main things on the list? And one would assume things like volcanism, for example, or earthquakes. And then from there you go on the list, and I assume that also kill shots from the sun, made notorious by Ed Dames, who you will be familiar with, is another one that you might have put on that list. But if it's not on the list, then, maybe we should know why not, and so on.
Yeah, actually, that kill shots thing is an example of stuff we don't do, because the problem with that kill shots idea is that we have absolutely no idea of who the viewers are, their track records. The never seen the sessions. So
I guess
that's the type of problem.
Okay, what I'm saying is this: did you factor the sun and solar flares and CMEs into the Earth changes?
No, we simply looked at what those places on the Earth looked like.
Okay.
And then with by the way, I have the numerical data for you now, but we looked at what the Earth looked like in these places and simply reported back what it looked like. So this is totally different from the type of thing that you're asking about with this kill shot thing, because that's looking at a full explanation of what happened. From my perspective, that type of analysis requires so much data and is so advanced. It's not just to find the information of what happens at targets on the Earth, but you then have to do more more investigations to find out where those changes are coming from. To actually do that reliably, in my opinion, requires so much background and so much preparatory stuff. And then to make any conclusions from that, you must be able to publish all the sessions. You must be able to see all the sessions. And you must know the track records of those people. You just can't have a person on late night radio say, this is what's going to happen, and say, this is kill shot, make a run for it. You just can't, a scientist can't do that. So I consider all of that kill shot stuff to be hearsay.
Okay,
for example,
that's absolutely fine, and I have no problem with that. But before you kind of go down that road any further, I'd like to come back to your data and sort of answer that question since you've got the data, and then
I've got the data up now, and I can actually tell you the numbers.
Okay, because the question I had been asking that before I sort of characterized it as the kill shot, actually really referring to CMEs and solar flares and that sort of thing.
Well, actually, Kerry, you're asking a really good question, and absolutely understand that I am with you on the question. I just don't have the answer to it.
Right.
The question you're asking, and this is so important, is what's causing these changes? And I myself have wondered, is there something going wrong with the sun? Or I've even wondered, is there, it's now really very certain that we live in a binary star system, and that the other star is a brown dwarf. And among really mainstream astronomers, this isn't really much in dispute anymore. What is sort of silly about this whole thing is that the mainstream astronomers are saying we're just about a year or so away from knowing exactly where this thing is. The idea that they don't know where a star, multiple times the size of Jupiter, is in our own solar system is so absurd, it's ridiculous. But they say it, and it's not challenged by anybody. They know perfectly well where it is.
Okay, thank you so much. No, that's just so refreshing to hear.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that I know that that's what's causing this thing.
I understand, but thank you very much for that.
Okay, so back to the actual data. We have the actual for timeline A and timeline B. I can say the following averaging numbers. Let's start with 2008. For 2008, there was only one spot. There's no two timelines. And the disaster sessions out of all 37 sessions for that target, for that timeline, for that time point, we had 37 sessions from the best remote viewers on the planet with published track records. Okay? Everybody, so 37 sessions, only 2 had information suggesting major changes, like big disaster stuff. That's 2 out of 37. That's pretty close to 0. Now, and I'm just assuming those 2 were just, even the best remote viewers can make mistakes. So no, these things is not 100%. But for timeline A, which is the one where the scientific authorities continue to deny or ignore the reality of remote viewing, out of the 38 sessions, we had 38 sessions for that timeline, we had 20 out of those 38 describing essentially wipeout disasters. That's a lot. The difference between 2 out of 37 versus 20 out of 38, that's not like a subtle thing. Now, for the other timeline, for timeline B, which is where the scientific community was brave and said, hey, guys, get over it, remote viewing actually exists, that did seem to improve things a little bit. And what I meant by that is that there were 17 sessions out of the 38 sessions for that timeline that had total wipeout disasters. So, you see, 20 out of 38 for the first timeline, where scientific community was obstinate and continued to refuse 20 out of 38, versus 17 out of 38 for timeline B, where the scientific community sort of fessed up that remote viewing was real. So 20 went down to 17. So that seemed to me a little bit of an improvement. Now, that doesn't mean it's statistically significant. Those numbers are still fairly close to each other, 20 and 17. But nonetheless, they were in the direction that was expected, that knowledge of the reality of remote viewing, once it spread throughout the populace, we were expecting to have some basic improvement in the timeline. And so the movement, even though it was slight, was in the expected direction.
Okay, but what you're also talking about, if you have 20 and the total number is 37, you have 17 that are not showing total wipeout as you...
Oh, actually, but that was 20 out of 38. So that's a good point. That means out of the 38 sessions, you have 38 minus 20, which is 18 sessions, showing essentially maybe some change, but not much, not total wipeout. So that's a very, very good point. So the difference, but that sometimes happens even when there is change, because sometimes some viewers simply don't like to look at that stuff. That's why a lot of viewers don't do missing person cases. They just simply don't like to see that type of thing. So the issue is not, but you're raising a really good point. You're saying, okay, if 20 out of 38 are showing wipeout disasters, then you're also saying that 18 out of 38 are not showing that stuff. So I'm going to now say one of the fundamental principles of looking at remote viewing data. With remote viewing data, you cannot determine what is there by what is not being reported. You can only determine what is there by what is reported. It's like going into a room. You send somebody into a room and say, I want you to go into that room and tell me what you see. All right, they go into the room and they come back out. And they say, well, I saw pictures on the wall, I saw a bed, I saw a rocking chair, and I saw a carpet. Okay, and I saw a chandelier. And they said, okay, but I noticed that you didn't notice that there were shoes in the closet. And now, can you say that there are no shoes in the closet because they weren't reported? So the viewers report what they report, and what they don't report, they simply don't report. So you can't say that a viewer went someplace and saw and looked at something and did not report something. So that means that that thing does not exist. So you can't say that.
Hey, that's, yeah, very good point, and very well said. So at this moment, in terms of the remote viewers who gave you a timeline A and a timeline B for 2013, the ones that did report, that were reporting Earth changes, when you say what you seem to be surprised by is the amount of Earth changes. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was originally scoffing at the whole idea of this Mayan calendar thing. I mean, I just thought that was silly. And I said, well, you know, let's see if we can use this. And I needed a 5-year period because I didn't want to wait 10 or 15 years. I just said, let's see if we can do it over a 5-year period, see if we can see some subtle changes in the climate. And then, so that was originally going to be a very difficult project, where I was thinking about how in the world are we going to analyze these data in order to come up with subtle things, because remote viewing is not very good with subtle things. It's really good with sort of big, blunt, basic things. And then we got these results, and from a scientific perspective, I'm not talking about a human perspective, but from a scientific perspective, this was wonderful. Because, remember, a scientist has to be okay with being proven wrong. So I really enjoyed these results because they were so clear. And if I'm wrong and these things don't happen, then I simply say, well, we learned a whole heck of a lot. That was really good. But if I'm right and these things do happen, I say, well, we learned a whole heck of a lot. I mean, because it was such a big level of change that we found, and I'll describe some of the sessions if you'd like later so you can really see it yourself. because there was such a major level of change, that we got what I call a binary result, meaning it's either on or off. It's not like subtle. And that's perfect for a big demonstration like, actually not a demonstration, but a big experiment like this.
Well, let me ask you this, because this is an interesting question that's coming into my mind. And this is the thing.
Yeah.
Since 2008, right now we're in 2012, halfway
Yes.
through it, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
If you did the same thing, only you ended it at this point, June of 2012, I wonder if you would have gotten the same results. In other words, has the Earth changes already happened significantly?
Well, the things that we described in the data have not happened. So if
None of them had happened yet, is what you're saying.
and what we should have gotten is the same type of things we got in 2008. I'm going camping with my family sometime this summer, and I'm expecting the beach to still be there and to be happy in the middle of 2012. And so that will be similar to what it was in 2008. And I'd expect the sessions to show the same type of, I'd expect us to get almost no disaster content in the middle of 2012.
Okay.
And what we're really asking is, will there be this disaster content in reality in 2013? I want to say one other thing. This is really important. From the theory of remote viewing, as it's developed, as I develop with respect to quantum mechanics, and the generalization of quantum mechanics to the macro level, the big level of you and I, it is impossible to think of anything that does not exist in some timeline, meaning anything that you can think or perceive does exist. So from that perspective, and again, we're not going into the physics of it this time, but from that perspective, all of these results that we report in these sessions do, in fact, actually happen. The only real question is the event that is encompassing all of these things that actually happen sufficiently big that we will see it in our particular timeline? That's the only real question.
Okay, that's very good, and that's very interesting. So again, I guess what I'm curious about is how these changes that you're describing played out again, which is kind of was why I was saying give me a list of what you are calling Earth changes, because were you seeing in these coastal areas as a result of volcanism, earthquakes, tsunamis? In other words, were these the things that were happening in these places, or did you did you look at Key West and see nothing because something had happened, but you don't know?
No, the viewers slip in time a bit, so they don't look exactly. This happens with viewing all the time, and very often they report that in their sessions. These are really good viewers, and they can sort of sense when they're slipping in time. So when they see something on the ground, they also slip a little bit in time and go to something that may have happened a week before, or a month before, or 2 months before, that caused whatever they're seeing to happen. So if they're seeing the result of a tsunami, but it doesn't actually happen on June 1st, 2013, they see like the wreckage of what happened with that tsunami, then what they actually do is they move back in time. They move from a telephoto lens perspective of June 1st. They widen the angle until they eventually figure out what happened, and they say, oh my gosh, there's a tsunami. And then they actually widen it a little bit, and they see what caused that tsunami. So they see the cause of the tsunami, then they see the actual impact on the coast, and then the whole thing sort of comes out, because they're trained to do that. They're trained to actually look at something, find something, and then widen the angle of their perspective, both in time and space, until they can figure out what's actually going on there. And again, I have to say this. This is not hearsay. For example, let's say you take your car to a guy that has a gas station, and he has to replace some type of seals in the engine. And he does it, and you drive it away, and then it starts backfiring and doing funny things. So then you take it to a dealer or a better person, and the person looks at the repair and says, the first guy put these things in backwards. How much did you pay for this? And he said, I paid $500 for this. Okay. So he says, all right, look, I'm going to have to sue the guy. So will you write me a letter saying exactly what you found? And the guy writes a detailed letter. The seals were put in backwards, causing backfiring and so on. And he signs it. Okay? And then you go and you sue the guy and you go to court. And the judge says, okay, here you are, Mr. So-and-so, who owned a car, and you said it was repaired badly by this guy. What proof do you have? And then you show him the letter. And the letter is from the other mechanic who fixed it and put the seals in correctly. And it details all the changes. You know what the judge does? He throws the whole thing out and he says, you can't tell me this. This is hearsay. You're just telling me that someone's saying something. I have to actually have that person in front of me. You have to bring the other mechanic in so I can interrogate that person to figure out who's telling the truth. So with these data, this is not hearsay. This is not me saying, you know, we have all these massive changes in 2013, trust me. I'm saying these are the data. Here are the actual sessions. Look at them yourself. You figure it out. And then these are the track records for these people. Again, I know it's hard for people to do all that stuff, so that's why we put it all together in that DVD. But nonetheless, all of the data are there for you to look at. And so it's not a matter of faith. It's not a matter of trusting me. It's a matter of simply me reporting to you what I find in these data. And if you'd like, I can actually show you some examples. For example, we can start with the Sydney Opera House if you want.
All right.
Would you want me to do that?
Sure. Why don't you do that? Let's go down that road.
Okay. Well, looking, for example, at the Sydney Opera House, we can look, for example, at one of the, well, actually at the sessions that were done by Daz Smith. Now, Daz Smith does CRV, that's controlled remote viewing, and he works with Lynn Buchanan. And he did sessions for 2008 and the two timelines for 2013. Now, for the 2008 target, this may be a little bit hard to believe for some of your listeners or viewers, but who are new to remote viewing, but these viewers are really good in the sense that anybody can go up to a piano and bang on it and make noise, but if you're going to be in Carnegie Hall and do a concert, you really got to study with this stuff and practice it and have a couple 10 or more years of work with it. Well, Daz Smith had described Sydney, Australia, the Opera House perfectly. He has perfect sketches of what the Opera House looks like. You know, it has that very distinctive architecture, and it's right on the coast, right next to the water, with a little sidewalk around it. He draws everything. And then he actually writes in the session, and this is somewhat unusual for someone to do it, but he does it. He says, this is Sydney Harbor. This is the Opera. He actually identifies the place as the Opera House. And Sydney.
Okay, and so he does this, and I'm assuming you're saying in his 2008. So
yeah, and it's a good day. It's a nice day. He describes a nice day. The boats are out and everything's good.
And then it was his job to look at it again in 2013?
That's right, with two other sessions. Remember, we have two other timelines.
Right.
And so he looks at and for the other sessions, and what he finds. Let's look at the first timeline where scientific community refuses to acknowledge the reality of remote viewing. Again, he draws the topography of the shapes of the actual Opera House. Really nice. The three peaks, and he identifies them not as mountains, but this is a structure, but they have this peak structure. He sketches them really nicely, but but then he says that something's wrong here. They're all beaten up. They're weathered. Something's impacted people a lot. And then he writes, I don't feel any people here. Now remember what I said earlier? You can't go on what remote viewers don't see. You can only see what they do see. But this is something he did see. So if he came back with a session that didn't have any people in it, you can't say that there weren't people. But the fact that he consciously saw that there were no people, that's real data.
Okay.
So he didn't see any people in this place. And in the other timeline, in 2008 rather, he did see people. And so there was something that was very impacted, very weathered, very beaten up buildings, no people. And then let's go to the structures were highly exposed to strong winds. The structures were really being beaten up by the winds, and no people.
What about water damage, inundation by water, anything of that?
All types of stuff, just beaten up buildings.
Okay, but
And by the way, in the 2008 session, he similarly draws the buildings, but they're not beaten up. They're really nice.
okay.
They're in pristine condition. So here he draws the exact same topology or the topography, the shapes of the buildings, describes them, notes that the people are gone, and then says these buildings are all beaten up. So that's sort of an indication to me that something's, he has that huge contrast between 2008 and the first timeline, or 2013. Now let's look at the second timeline. This is where a scientific community eventually acknowledges the reality of remote viewing. Okay, and so what he does is he again finds, he goes to the same target, but you know what he sees? This is the thing. This time he actually sees people. That's why I decided this was a little better than the first timeline. Because at the first timeline, he didn't see any people, and he noticed. It's real data. It's not that he just didn't observe any. He actually noticed, he observed that he didn't see any. But in this timeline, he does see people. And they're moving. There was some type of major earth change, like a quake. They're in tremendous fear. The people are moving as a tide, and they're all moving in one direction. They're leaving behind them. They're leaving wherever they were. It's his exact words. A strong, relentless motion in one direction away from wherever they were. And then he has really good sketches of people slowly moving, and almost everybody essentially is on foot, meaning the vehicular traffic. They're not like driving out or taking buses or planes. They're walking, they're hoofing it. So my interpretation for that is that the vehicular transport system is broken down. And then he says this is a vast tract of flat land that they're walking on, and this is an exodus. And then he widens his angle. Okay, he widens his angle. He has a sketch of that peaked structure, the Opera House. He has that peaked structure on the edge of the coast, and then he has this huge sketch of this wave. Something hits and then produces this wave, this bubbling motion, a tsunami type thing, that causes tremendous pressure from down below to rise up. This is an ocean wave he's sketching. So you have this tremendous, I'm reading from the session actually, tremendous intense upward rising pressure. Something moves up in the movement, and I'm talking about water movement right now. He's clearly describing water and he's sketching water. And so what's happening is something in the water is impacting Sydney, and that's causing people to leave. But at least he's seeing people. So I sort of interpret this, and you may interpret this differently. I interpret this, and he's saying that none of the people are happy. He's writing, his exact words are, no happy people. And he says, just joint surrender. I mean, really, escaping, relocation, leaving. Those are his words.
All right, let me ask you a couple of things. One is you're looking at these reports, and I'm also wondering whether it's possible to show them visually on the screen to the listeners here as we go through them.
Can you? I mean, I can do that with Skype. I can actually capture a window. Would you like me to do that?
Yeah. I think that would be interesting for people to see drawings of the remote viewers of the various sessions we discussed.
Okay.
And the other thing is that I also want to know is whether or not you went through all of the reports, all 38 of them, and sort of made a checklist, like in other words, of
yes,
tsunami,
I did.
water damage, in other words, volcanism. This one had, and how many were volcan, how many were this, and how many were that. You know what I mean?
It didn't do that much of, no, I was more blunt than that.
Okay.
By the way, tell me, um,
And we can also, I can pull up, like, for example, a web page. So if you have it on a website and you want me to show it on the screen, I can do that, if that's easier for you.
tell me if you're seeing it now on my video.
No, what I'm seeing is you at the moment.
Oh, you're seeing? I'm actually sharing a screen. I'm actually
Yeah,
sharing a window.
it's slower. Yes, now we are. Very good. Okay, so
Okay.
I'm going to.
So this is the people, the vehicles. See, there's only that one vehicle, and everybody else is walking.
Right.
Now I'm scrolling down. Let me see if you actually can see what he's written there. A vast tract of land, flat land, AOL, exodus. See the word exodus? That means it's a feeling of an exodus.
Yes, I got it.
Okay. Can I scroll down a little further? Let's see if this works. Okay. Now, do you see how he widens the angle now? Now he has this peaked structure, of course. This is what I'm interpreting as a Sydney Opera House. He has really good sketches of the Sydney Opera House in some of the other places.
Okay.
But this nonetheless is still capturing the peak. He's very far away from it at this point. He's still capturing the edge of land, a peaked structure, which is what the Opera House is. And can you see this big bubbling up of a wave?
Yes.
And underneath that you see bubbles, upward pressure movement, rising, intense heat and pressure from below.
Okay, and let me ask you, I'm sorry here, but I want to know whether or not any of these people pinpointed when in 2013 they thought that what they were seeing was happening or had happened.
Kerry, you're asking the million-dollar questions. You're really good. You're really, I'm serious. As an interviewer, you're really good. No, I don't have that information. But at least I do have this information. I do show that the type of analysis I'm using here is very crude analysis, very blunt analysis, looking for major changes between 2008 and 2013, and to see if I can see any difference between the two timelines in 2013. You're now asking more subtle questions, which is the different types of change in an attempt to actually find the cause of this.
Well, because it's interesting that they widen back to this point, and in essence, they are looking for a cause, so they're finding one cause, but it's not going back to the planetary level.
No, how about we move to Fort Jesus, if you don't mind? That would actually help a little bit.
All right, fine.
Okay, so actually I'm going to do two things now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and tell me when you see me again.
I see you now.
All right, so let me get rid of this session. Let me ask you really quickly. Would it be useful for your viewers, your listeners, to see the session where Daz Smith actually describes Sydney when it's in good shape, so that you can actually get an idea of the quality of these sessions? Would you want to see that?
I think that it might be good as a point of comparison. So if you can show it easily and without a lot of trouble before we move to, because I know a lot of people are going to have huge curiosity about, the next.
Yeah, what you want to see is this thing really, like are these, like how good, the real thing is you want to say, how good are these viewers really? And so in 2008, you know what the Sydney Opera House used to look like. So you want to be able to see, did he describe it? So this is the same exact viewer. Okay, I'm going to show a number of different pictures here. And now and you'll see how he gets better. Sharing the window and that window. Now you tell me when you see it.
Okay, now.
Okay, now let's show you a number of pictures. You'll see that I'm actually taking the liberty right now to show you a little bit how this remote viewing actually works, how they get an initial impression and then they fine-tune it as you go along. So this is one of the early impressions that Daz Smith had. So notice he had the water, the water on the right-hand side, and then this buildings on the edge of a built-up artificial surface.
Yes.
Okay? And he's clearly identifying it. You see the words water and sea and man-made organized structures, various all sizes and shapes. Okay, now let's let him get a little better as he moves on a little further. Now he fine-tunes this a little bit more, and hopefully you can see now that he's got the water and he's showing the edge of the water, how it's a liquid interface with the edge. And he says that there's a port. Do you see the word port on the right-hand side? So he knows that he's looking at the spot where the two meet, where land meets, and artificial land and water. And then he actually writes that he feels that the water might be deeper than it should, and so on. And now look at this picture. Do you see the Opera House?
Yes.
And notice what he writes right next to it. It's a side view.
Uh-huh.
And notice what he writes on the right-hand side. Sydney. Do I need to say much more?
No, excellent. Uh-huh.
So this really, so the question is, if these people can do this, well, are the 2013 data accurate? So anyway, he goes on. I'll get rid of this now. I think we've demonstrated the point.
Okay.
Unless you want me to, now I think we should go on to another session to show Fort Jesus, Mombasa. Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that does get at a little bit of your question, what might be causing this. And then if you want later, I can get into Washington, D.C. That's sort of fascinating. The last thing, I don't know, is this a 2-hour interview? Are we ending it?
No, we actually are not. It's not a limited thing here. What we want to do is I don't want to exhaust you completely, but I'd like to go on for around 2 hours until we can cover this sufficiently where it feels like we've got the information out there.
Okay, good.
I wanted to open it to questions after that.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
Or so.
Yeah. All right. So so let's actually go to Fort Jesus. And the reason I was asking is, if this stuff is on our way, then government clearly knows about it. I mean, we organize ourselves on the lines of secrecy. That's how humans work. We work with secrecy. Our congressional meetings are often in secret. Our presidential meetings are always in secret. The Federal Reserve Board is in secret. Corporate meetings are in secret. Everything is secret, the way we govern ourselves. And if something big like this was happening, you know that the very first thing that the government would do is say, don't let anyone know, because it would cause panic, especially if they couldn't do anything about it. And so there should be obvious things that the government itself is doing that we should be saying is anomalous by itself. So if we have time, we can go into some of these anomalous governmental behaviors that sort of indicate that they know something's coming and are preparing for it. But let's first go to Fort Jesus.
Well, of course, Camelot covers that extensively, and so obviously it would be lovely to bring that into the whole mix, and
that's why I brought it up.
Yeah, it's great to bring it up, and so, but let's still do some more nuts and bolts here so that we can see the evidence.
That's actually great. Okay, so let's actually go to Des Smith's session for June 2nd, June 1st, timeline A for Fort Jesus. Now, remember, it's the ruins. Fort Jesus is a fort that's in ruins, and it's an old stone fort, an old Portuguese stone fort on the coast of East Africa. And he has a session where he describes the location. Now, mind you, the fort is surrounded by Mombasa, and Mombasa is a major city. So, you're not expecting just to see the fort itself, but you also be expecting people, what's happening with people. So, I have a bit of a problem here. I can fix it. I can fix it easily, and let me do that. And so what the session in particular, I have to put on my desktop and open it with Acrobat, which I just did, because the sketch I want to show you was rotated 90 degrees, and that wasn't the best. Okay, so here's this page. This is the exact page that you really want to see, because it really shows what you wanted to see here. So let me...
And just let me say thank you very much, because we don't often get a person who's able to sort of troubleshoot and handle this stuff with the visuals without very much preparation. And,
yeah, no, I
and
understand.
people are going to be fascinated to see the actual, sessions themselves. I personally have done remote viewing, so I'm very familiar with not only doing the session, but also feeling, seeing what they look like. But I think it's quite fun for people to see.
Yeah, it is. It is fun. So let me actually share this window. And share the window, and the window I'm going to share is that one. Let's see. Tell me if you see a window with a lot of remote viewing writing on it.
Yes.
All right. All right, this is the beginning part of a session, and this is for 2013. Remember, it's in Mombasa. Mombasa is a really big city. I mean, it's not as big as New York, but it's bigger than Cincinnati. I mean, it's a big city on the coast. And then the fort is a small thing right on the edge. Okay? So notice on the right-hand side, the first thing he's noticing these really tall structures, and he's also getting the sense of a disaster. That's just initial impressions. Now let's scroll down a little bit, and he's getting the idea of some buildings, if you're seeing, having sort of a pancaking motion, downward motion in some of these buildings. And he sort of says it looks a little bit like the Twin Towers type of stuff. And then he has another picture here where he has, do you see these big structures, really tall structures?
Yes.
Now you see that swirling motion around the structures?
Yes.
That means something's hitting those structures and swirling around it. He can't figure out what it is. But then he says down at the bottom, many differing man-made structures, buffered, hit by speedy energy. Okay?
Interesting, yes.
And now he's got this page, and I am going to rotate this page clockwise. And you get now you see what happens here. He has water. He has the ocean at this point. And do you see how he has an arrow coming in from the top, and he says something from above hits. It's speedy and with force, and hits it and causes a big splash. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and then this causes a wave, and we'll show the wave later on in another sketch. But then he says that he has here on the edge, on the right-hand side, there's a long man-made structure, strong curved components, and so whatever is impacting happens in the water, and then impacts it later. Now I've got another thing, and I'm going to have to rotate this one counterclockwise so you can see it. Well, you see the tall building?
Yes.
You see the tall building? Let's go to the bottom of the tall building. See all the bottom people down there?
Yes.
And there's lots of people, and they're arranged around the base of this tall building, and he's drawing in a lot of wind, lots of people. So he's getting this idea of a disaster. Now let's go down to the next page. You see these dark buildings with clouds and everything?
Yes.
Now this is a really good outline of what Mombasa skyline is like. Dark, disruptive, black and shadow. It's a battered city, stormy, angry clouds, battered structures. Now today, Mombasa is not battered. If you were going to Mombasa, it would be like beautiful. I mean, the tourists are great.
Yeah.
But this city is all beaten up.
And thinking exactly that. I'm thinking, oh man, why haven't I gone to this place before? No, it looks.
Yeah, but this place is all battered up.
Yeah.
And okay, now let's actually go to his. There's actually a lot of words that he writes here at the very end, but I think I want to stop the sharing and go on to the next session where we can look at the other timeline. And by the way, I'll just read some of the words here, although your resolution might not be big enough to see this, so I'll just read some of the words in his summary at the end. And he writes here about about life forms. He said, some are outside the structures and feel bunched. Some are inside the structures, and some feel trapped. In terms of the energetics, he's getting a fast-moving, energetic. It's building. It's erratic. It's intense. It's impacting to the location. It's a surprise. Causes chaos and damage. So I scored this session as one of showing significant damage, significant change, as compared with, again, you should be seeing my video again.
Yes.
As compared with a session that, it doesn't have that type of a change. So let me go now and look at the second timeline. This is for the timeline for 2013, timeline B, where the scientific community does fess up. And, I think I just should do the same thing I did with this other session, which is to save it on my desktop and open it up with Acrobat so that I can rotate these pages and let you see them a little better. Okay, so let me scroll down to a telling.
While you're doing that, is it possible
Yes.
for you to answer a question in regard to,
Absolutely.
in other words, you have, again, we're saying around 20 sessions that are like DASs, for example, right?
Yeah.
And in those other 19 sessions for that exact city, do they match a significant?
Yeah, there's a lot of, not everything matches. Some viewers see things that others don't. But in general speaking, with these particular viewers, you get a close match of this type of stuff.
Okay, but what about this idea? Is it possible that you get people that would say things, in other words, one sees inundation by water, another sees inundation by wind or hit by a meteor, or another person sees fire? Would those classify in the city?
Yeah, we don't. I don't see a lot of information in these data that conflict like that.
Okay.
Meaning, they seem. And I think the next best thing is, after I show you Daz Smith, let me then go to Dick Allgaier, who's also one of the best viewers on the planet, and show you his sessions of the exact same target for Jesus Mombasa, so you can compare the two, and that will answer your question.
Okay.
Would that be okay? Okay, so let me actually share this window again. And the window I want to share is that one. And tell me when you're seeing the remote viewing session.
Okay, now it's come up.
Okay, so here we have, on the right-hand side, he's clearly identified land, hit, buffered, impacted, moved, mixed with stuff. There's structures and vegetation and stuff. And on the very bottom, do you see it says island tidal wave on the lower right-hand side?
Yes.
Mombasa is an island, and he's describing a tidal wave. So that island characterization is 100% accurate. So now notice he has the liquid, the ocean on the left-hand side, and waves moving in to hit the land on the right-hand side. So the ocean is on the left and that side, and he's clearly saying this is an island, and there's the idea of a tidal wave. All right, now let's move down and get another picture of this exact same thing. Let me scroll down, and I am going to have to rotate this particular picture clockwise. There we have it. Tell me when you can see it.
Okay, now.
Okay, so here we have the movement of waves. Do you see how he's actually drawn the waves?
Yes.
And he says there's movement in one direction, fluent and forceful. And then he writes messy, moving, thick.
Okay, but let's get back. This is supposed to be timeline B in 2013, the slightly...
Yeah, so both timelines have a tsunami type of a thing. Now, I'd like at this point, if this is okay, I'd like to go to Dick Allgaier's sessions, where he actually observes what causes the tsunami. I think that's what you're really interested in. So would that be okay? Can I do that?
Well, it's one of the things I'm really interested in, but go ahead, yes.
Okay. No, go ahead. What were you saying?
No. I'm just saying that there are many things I'm really interested in about all of this.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
that is one thing. I'm definitely interested in what causes the ultimate cause and whether the viewers were able to sort of, as you say, pull back the lens.
Yeah.
To
Well,
a degree.
I think the best role that I can do right now is simply show you the data. And this is one of those great things. By the way, do you see this is not hearsay. This is simply saying, these are the data, these are the actual things I was looking at, and that's why I concluded this. And this is the track record of this person, and it's publicly documented, and on our website you can see zillions of his sessions. So anyway, do you see a session now in front of you?
Yes.
With blue ink?
Yes.
Great. So here we have, this is the same target, Fort Jesus, Mombasa. And this is for I believe, this is for timeline A, okay? Which is the scientific community refusing to acknowledge. There really wasn't that much of a difference between timeline A and timeline B. But again, this is the one where the scientific community continued to refuse to acknowledge anything. So here he has, I'm starting here with, he clearly describes, this is right in the beginning of the session, a shoreline, and he has a huge tsunami-hurricane, meaning in the beginning of the session he can't figure out what it is. It's either a tsunami or a hurricane. And he writes it hits the shoreline with force, and the water moves inland. And he clearly draws the shoreline and describes it and labels it as a shoreline. And then he draws a mountain, and he actually labels it Kilimanjaro. Now, this is why this is so interesting. Kilimanjaro is 70 miles away from Fort Jesus. It's not that far away. I mean, you don't walk to it, but it's not very far away. He noticed that there was a mountain, and this is what you get with this level of military-grade remote viewing. He not only noticed a mountain, but he identified which one it was. And this is extraordinary. So your viewers, I'm so grateful that you asked me to show you these data, because you have to see this to believe it sometimes. Okay, so then he notices the mountain again. Like now he starts looking around at where he is, and he notices that there's a lot of water. Now let me scroll down to this sketch, okay? And he actually shows where there was once water on the right and then land on the left. And he says, this land was wet water, and was wet water and is now dry. So he has Kilimanjaro in the background, and then the coast to the right, which is exactly the way it's supposed to be. If you're looking at this from the south looking north, which is the way we normally look at a globe, and meaning if you look at a globe with the north positioned at the top and the south positioned at the bottom, the Indian Ocean is on the right-hand side and the land is on the left. So what he's basically saying on this particular picture is whatever that water was that impacted the land on his first sketch, it got to the foothills of Mount Kilimanjaro. Do you see how I was able to make that conclusion? Meaning that first sketch...
Oh.
Okay, let's go back to the first sketch so you can see.
Yeah. No.
Here's the first sketch where he has this tsunami hitting the shoreline. And then, let's go down to the bottom. He has more in this session, where he has this, where the water has receded. When you get dry mud, the mountain in the distance, that means that water, now this is the conclusion that I draw, and look, I'm willing to say I was wrong. I mean, I'm showing you the data, you can interpret it yourself, but
I guess I'm not understanding in the sense of the timing. Is he saying that water is going to come and it's going to get up to the level of the mountain and then it's going to recede again?
Yes, that's how I'm interpreting this session. He has clearly, in the very beginning of the session, he has a tsunami hitting the shoreline. And as you follow the session, and I'm only showing you sketching snapshots, because those are so easy to describe over a show like this, and it's also so easy to show because I can actually show you the pictures.
Does he tell you when, like in the span of time,
No,
So
no, Kerry, it doesn't go like that. What happens is time really doesn't exist, and so really what happens is he's getting all of these images and pulling them all together.
All right.
So it's a very nonlinear type of arrangement, and the job of the analyst is to put all these together. What I look for is evidence that he's on target, first of all. And then I see he's identifying a mountain and calling it Mount Kilimanjaro, which is right next to Mombasa.
Right.
And I'm saying, okay, he's in the right spot of the globe. And then I'm seeing a tsunami. He's clearly saying something hits the water, causes a tsunami. And then he follows the water to see how far it goes. And then he has a picture here of it falling back. Now notice that the tsunami doesn't actually get to the mountain, Mount Kilimanjaro, nor does it go over the mountain. So remember the Sony Pictures 2012 where the tsunami actually went over the Himalayas?
Yes.
That's not happening here.
Right.
But the very fact that it gets a great many miles inland tells you that that was a big tsunami. That was way bigger than the one that hit the Fukushima plant. This one actually went a number of miles inland and got sort of within eye range, stone's throwing range of Mount Kilimanjaro. That tells you that it must have really impacted Mombasa. And that helps me to understand Daz Smith's session. Because clearly, according to, if I put Daz Smith's sessions together with Dick Algire's sessions, whatever the wave was, it really battered the buildings inside Mombasa. It didn't just hit the edge of the island where the fort was. It actually got into the buildings. That's how I interpret both sessions together.
Okay.
And this looks like it's a sketch of when the water is receding. And see, he says very clearly here, the land was wet and now it's dry. And then he says it was covered with water and there's rutted patterns, dried mud. The land is the water's receding. And it's really great. The mountain, he shows the snow caps on the top, vegetation at the bottom. I mean, this is really good stuff. So anyway.
Okay, so at this point, what I want to do, and since people are getting a picture of sort of the individuals' takes on things, I'd like to kind of start to group the data a little bit, people, so that again we can get an idea whether or not what is being said is, in essence, something to take very seriously for the people that are listening. You know what I'm saying? Because ultimately, that's kind of where this is going. I mean, it's not just idle data. It actually could affect people's lives. So, and it could affect them fairly soon because we're only 6 months away from 2013 beginning.
Yeah, but you do have to say, remember what I said in the beginning, this is not a, and I know this is going to upset people, but I have to say it because it's true. It's not a prediction.
Sure.
It's what I can say is in a context, especially of multiple timelines, you can't make a prediction. But the theory is that if some event is sufficiently big, it can affect so many timelines that it could be something that we could run into.
Okay,
and
it has to do with the probability of the event, depending on how big it is. But so I'm still trying to determine whether or not your data, because I'm looking at 20 reports as being fairly significant Earth changes as you describe them, and you described a couple of them close up. And then you've got, that means there's 18 reports that are not like that. But what does it mean that they're different? Are they positive? Are they wonderful? Are they exactly like they are today? In other words, what are we talking with the other 18 at all?
Okay, that's a very reasonable question. Let me show you an example from Deborah Duggan Takagi, who also does HRVG, or Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild stuff, and works with Glenn Wheaton, and she's also one of the best remote viewers on the planet. And she got some sessions where they looked like they were fairly good, but they didn't have any disaster content. Now let me find one, for example. Just give me a second here. That will be a good one.
Okay, and while you do that, I just want to say that I'm getting reports that there was an earthquake here in the general Southern California area that was around a 4.0. It's not significant by Southern California standards, but my webmaster who's listening in here is reporting that they felt it. I didn't feel it here. I'm further north.
Okay. Okay, here's a session for Vaitupu Tuvalu. Now, understand that if you look at all of Deborah's Duggan Takagi's sessions for the whole project, she very much falls in line with sessions that have disaster content for the 2013 sessions, but not for the 2008. But I'm looking now at one of her sessions that is for Vaitupu Tuvalu, that's an island in the South Pacific that looks like it's a very good session, but it does not have disaster content. So, all right, let me just basically describe it. There are some sketches, but the sketches aren't as revealing as well, one of them is. Let me, it's okay. Let me actually show you the session. Okay, let me open it with Acrobat, and then let me give you a page near the end where, this is a web page. So let me rotate this clockwise. And now let me share it with you. Thank you for being patient with me while I get this here. And tell me when you're seeing the sketch.
Yes, now. And just so that people understand what we're trying to do here at this moment is we're simply trying to get a look at what, if there are 38 reports from remote viewers and 20 of them have a sort of drastic earth changes. I wanted to see one of the 18 that did not have drastic earth changes and what they showed, just for comparison's sake.
Kerry, I've never been asked this by an interviewer before. I have been asked this when I presented this information in presentations in live settings. So I want to say you're good. I mean, you're really good. This is the type of question people really need to ask. I mean, that means there's a really comprehension. Anyway, you see this picture.
Yes.
So this is Vaitupu Tuvalu, an island. There's a lot of fishing on the coast of, in the South Pacific. So you can just see from this session, from this sketch, there's 14 pages in the session. But just from this sketch alone, you can see that she's right on target. She's got the ocean. She's describing warm, clear water. And if you look at Google Earth and look at Vaitupu Tuvalu, that's exactly what you see. You can see right through the water on Google Earth. I mean, it looks beautiful. You just feel like taking a vacation there. And you see, she says it's at the seashore. There's mollusks on the shore. There's fish in the water. That doesn't look like disaster to me. I mean, it could be, but it doesn't look like disaster to me. And let me sketch over to other houses. Do you see this house that she's sketched now?
Yes.
She's accurately said it looks like it's a wood house, maybe a thatched roof. And, I mean, she's good. I mean, she's really good. But I don't see, let me go to another, well, these are words, but let me turn this counterclockwise so you can see it. And then you can see some of the, look at what she writes. It's an archipelago. It's an area with many little islands, a lot of agriculture using a lot of manpower as opposed to machines, a tropical flavor. I mean, do you get the idea what you get with a military-grade remote viewer? I mean, this is good. I mean, this is really good.
Yeah.
So then she notices clams and cockles and a lot of fish, sea urchins, water teeming with life, warm, clean. Now, I can see a situation in which a disaster does occur, but she's just not picking it up. Meaning, she's not reporting that there is no disaster. She's just not noticing it. So, but how I score this session is it's very accurate in terms of disaster or no disaster. She's clearly describing Vaitupu Tuvalu, an island in the Pacific, of a group of islands. I mean, she's really accurate with all of that. I mean, I could have, as far as she is concerned, this could have been any target, anywhere. So it could be the Eiffel Tower. I mean, she had no idea of anything. So she's really describing this well.
Yes.
And I don't see any disaster content. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no disaster going on at the time. It's just that I'm not seeing it in the session. So I describe this.
Well, let me ask you a question about that. When the remote viewers are looking at a situation, they're looking at a place, and they're told to, in a certain sense, kind of describe the place within a certain period of time. It's vague, but it's a year. It's a year give or take, right?
Oh, wait a second. No, they're supposed to focus in on the exact date, and then during the session, they typically, if they see anything. Now, if they don't see anything that's happening that's of interest, then they just describe what it is on that exact day.
So in this case, did she not see anything of interest?
That's what it appears. She just focused right on that exact date, and she didn't report any disaster. Now, that doesn't mean that a disaster didn't happen, but she's not seeing it, and she's not reporting it. Now, she's not saying, I repeat, she's not saying there is no disaster. It's just information that's not being reported. So I cannot score this particular session as having disaster content. So it's one of the sessions.
But there is an overlay here. If you look at at least this one picture we've got on the screen at the moment, it looks, there's a sense of a placid kind of a scene. It says warm, clear water.
Yeah, that's how I got the feeling too.
Fishies, you know what I'm saying? Then it says seashore with mollusks. If I was looking at it, if it was stormy, for example, I don't think those would be the words that one would choose.
Yeah, that's how I viewed it. That's how I scored it.
Okay. So now my next question is that if that is one of the 18 that are happening during the year of 2013.
But I have to say also though, remember, you cannot say that this eliminates the possibility of disaster content just because it's not reported. Remember, remote viewers, you could actually have disaster content on this stuff, and she's just not seeing it.
Well, I'm just curious because it's always, it's very interesting because, for example, the day before a disaster could be a nice, beautiful day.
Exactly. And also sometimes remote viewers will go to a place and simply not want to see the bad stuff, and they'll only report the good stuff.
Right. Whatever they're sort of attracted to, maybe.
Yeah, just like if you went into a room and it was really messy in a corner, but you saw a nice picture on the wall and you saw the bed was made, and so you come out and describe what you saw, and you just don't mention that it was really messy in the corner, but you do say that you like the picture on the wall and that the bed was nice. So by saying you like the picture on the wall and the bed was nice, that doesn't say that there wasn't a messy corner just because you didn't mention it. So that's the problem we have with this session.